Look closely at this image. White beard, perfect smile, and that red suit we all idolize. It seems eternal, right? As if he had always been there. But careful, because sometimes memory deceives us. There is a shadow of suspicion hanging over this character, a rumor that claims everything you see is fake, that your childhood hero isn't a saint, but the greatest marketing trick in history, manufactured in a dark office in Atlanta to sell soda. Is modern Christmas actually a corporate scam, or is the reality even more twisted? Close your storybooks, because today we aren't here to tell fairy tales. We are here to dissect the myth. We are going to separate conspiracy from real history to discover if Coca-Cola actually brainwashed us, or if the true origin of that red suit hides secrets much older than anyone dares to admit. Our investigation begins far away from the North Pole and TV commercials. It starts under the scorching sun of what is now Turkey, back in the 4th century. That is where the man behind the mask lived, Nicholas of Bari, or rather, Nicholas of Myra. And forget about the velvet suit and the reindeer. This man was a Greek bishop. He wore liturgical robes. He had a thick beard, not because of some hipster trend, but due to strict Orthodox tradition. And his character wasn't exactly that of a giggling elf. Nicholas was a man of faith, but also a man of action. He was known for being strict, defiant, and above all, incredibly generous. The most famous legend, the key clue that connects to what we do today, tells the story of a poor father with 3 daughters. Back then, without a dowry, those girls couldn't get married, and their destiny looked, putting it mildly, quite dark. Nicholas heard about the drama, but he didn't want to make a spectacle of his charity. So, in the middle of the night, he approached the house window and threw bags of gold coins inside. According to the version we like to believe, those coins fell, by pure chance, into some stockings the girls had left drying by the fire. Ring a bell? Exactly. There you have Exhibit A, the origin of your stockings hanging by the chimney. Nicholas wasn't looking for credit. He was looking for justice. And that reputation as a secret gifter spread like wildfire across the Mediterranean. When Nicholas died, he became a superstar saint. He was the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, and, of course, children. His popularity was such that even when the Protestant Reformation tried to cancel saint worship in Northern Europe, Nicholas survived. They couldn't get rid of him. People loved him too much. But here is where the trail gets complicated. In the Netherlands, Saint Nicholas mutated. He transformed into Sinterklaas. And pay attention to this detail, because Sinterklaas is not the Santa Claus you know. Sinterklaas is a majestic, serious character who arrives by boat from Spain. Yes, you heard that right, from Spain. Because for the 17th century Dutch people, Spain was the land of oranges and exotic luxury. Sinterklaas rides a white horse, wears a bishop's mitre, and a long cape. And what color was that cape? Red. Centuries before the first cola was bottled, this gentleman was already wearing cardinal red. But careful, this doesn't acquit the brand just yet. Because Sinterklaas didn't just come to bring gifts, he came to judge. He had a book where he wrote down who had been good and who had been bad. And if you had been bad, he didn't bring you coal. He stuffed you in a sack and took you back to Spain. A pretty effective threat. Now, how does this serious bishop jump to the United States and become the magical grandpa? we have to thank, or blame, the city of New York. Originally, New York was New Amsterdam, a Dutch colony. The traditions were there, dormant. But the real catalyst wasn't pure tradition, it was satire. In the early 19th century, a writer named Washington Irving, the same guy who wrote Sleepy Hollow, decided to poke fun at the local culture. He wrote a satirical history of New York, describing St. Nicholas not as a skinny bishop, but as a chubby Dutch colonist, smoking a pipe and flying over the trees in a wagon tossing gifts. Irving did it as a joke, a caricature, but people didn't laugh at him. They fell in love with the idea. Suddenly, the strict saint figure was softening. He was becoming more magical, more mischievous. And then, in 1822, came the final blow. A professor named Clement Clarke Moore wrote the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas. This poem is the instruction manual for the modern Santa Claus. Moore took Irving's caricature and polished it. He removed the wagon and added a sleigh, and, most importantly, he gave him reindeer. 8 reindeer with proper names. Rudolph wasn't invited to the party yet. He would arrive a century later due to a department store strategy, but that's another story. Moore described St. Nicholas not as a normal human, but as a jolly old elf. He was small, could slip down chimneys by being magical, had a belly that shook like a bowl full of jelly when he laughed, and was covered in soot. Here we already have the skeleton of the suspect. Sleigh, reindeer, chimney, laugh, gifts, chubby. But visually, it was still absolute chaos. If you look at Victorian-era illustrations, Santa Claus had a severe identity crisis. Sometimes he was a tiny elf. Sometimes he was a terrifying giant. Sometimes he wore animal furs. Sometimes blue, green, yellow, or brown. There was no corporate standard. He could look like a magical hobo or a snow king. We needed someone to unify all of this. We needed Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a political cartoonist for Harper's Weekly during the American Civil War. He was an influencer of his time, and he had a soft spot for Santa Claus. For years, Nast drew Santa over and over, and with every drawing, he added details we consider canon today. It was Nast who decided Santa didn't live in Spain or in heaven, but at the North Pole. Why? Because the North Pole was neutral territory, belonging to no country, so Santa could be a universal symbol. Plus, the eternal snow helped with the aesthetic. Nast also gave us the idea of the workshop. He drew Santa making toys, not just buying them. He drew him reading letters, creating that magical bureaucracy. And most importantly for our mystery, Thomas Nast drew Santa Claus in a red suit. Many times. It's true that in the black and white prints you couldn't tell, but in the color illustrations of the late 19th century, like Victorian Christmas cards, red was already starting to win the battle. It wasn't the only color, but it was dominant. Red stood out against the snow. It was warm, it was regal, and it harkened back to the bishop's original robes. So, we reach the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Santa Claus is already a celebrity. He appears in department stores, rings bells on corners for the Salvation Army, and stars in ads of all kinds. He advertised tobacco, insurance, toys, and yes, he also advertised drinks. We saw him on covers of famous magazines like the Saturday Evening Post, painted by incredible artists like J.C. Leyendecker or Norman Rockwell. But there was a serious problem. Although the elements were there, consistency was still missing. Rockwell's Santa was sometimes more human, more tired. Other brands' Santas were sometimes a bit scary, with stiff masks or weird proportions. He wasn't a standardized icon. He was a public domain character interpreted by hundreds of different artists. A unifying force was missing. A global distribution machine was missing to say, "This is the face of Christmas, and we accept no other versions." The table was set. The ingredients had been simmering for millennia. The generosity of the Turkish bishop, the red cape and horse of the Dutch Sinterklaas, the magic and reindeer of the New York poets, and the visual design and polar address of the political cartoonist. Everything was ready. Santa Claus existed. He was fat, he was jolly, and he wore red long before the first bottle of Coca-Cola was sold. But he was a folk character, moldable. No one owned his image. Until, in the 1930s, a soda company struggling to sell cold drinks in winter decided it needed a mascot. And they weren't looking for a bishop or an elf. They were looking for someone you could meet in your living room, who made you want to crack open a bottle. Here is where the genius with the brush enters the scene, who, without knowing it, was about to hijack the imagination of the entire planet. It is 1931. The United States is deep in the Great Depression. People need hope. They need magic. And, according to Coca-Cola executives, they need to drink soda in winter, too. Until then, Coke was seen as a summer drink, something to beat the heat. But the company had a problem. Sales froze when temperatures dropped. They needed an ambassador who shouted, "Winter," but felt warm. And the elf Santa, the serious bishop, or the hobo in random colors wouldn't cut it. They needed something human, believable, and magnetic. Enter Archie Lee, the advertising executive at the Darcy Agency, who makes the decision that would change Christmas forever. He hires Haddon Sundblom. Sundblom wasn't just an illustrator. He was a Swedish-American oil painter, a big, jovial guy who understood classical art. Coca-Cola's brief was very specific. We want a real Santa Claus. Not a man dressed as Santa, but Santa Claus himself. They wanted to capture the very spirit of the character, moving away from the grotesque caricatures of the past. Sundblom got to work. He looked for inspiration in Clement Clark Moore's poem we mentioned earlier, but decided to ignore the tiny elf part. He wanted grandeur. For the face, he didn't use his imagination. He called his friend Lou Prentice, a retired salesman with a face wrinkled by laughter and a kind look, and used him as a model. Sundblom painted Prentice with impressive realism. He gave him a big buckle, shiny leather boots, and crucially, he humanized his proportions. He was no longer a strange being from the woods. He was the grandpa we all wish we had. The first ad appeared in the Saturday Evening Post in 1931 with the slogan, "My hat's off to the paws that refreshes." In the image, we see Santa taking off his hat, sweating a bit after work, drinking a Coke while reading children's notes. And the world went wild. The image was so powerful, so warm, and so real that people started writing letters to the company asking what Santa did in his free time. But Sundblom didn't just paint one picture and call it a day. Here is the key to why we think Coca-Cola invented the character. Repetition. Sundblom painted Santa Claus for Coca-Cola for 33 years straight, from 1931 to 1964. Every Christmas, religiously, a new oil painting. When his friend Lou Prentice passed away, Sundblom started using himself as a model, looking in a mirror. That's why, if you look at the ads from the 40s and 50s, the belt buckle is backwards. He was painting his reflection. During those 3 decades, Coca-Cola didn't just put ads in magazines, they flooded the world. They put this Santa on billboards, on life-size cardboard cutouts in pharmacies, on calendars, on metal trays, on toys. It was the first analog viral campaign in history. The image was so omnipresent that it crushed all other versions. The blue Santa, the green Santa, the skinny Santa, they all vanished from the collective imagination because they couldn't compete with Coca-Cola's distribution machine. This saturation is what created the Mandela effect we suffer from today. That strange psychological phenomenon where millions of people share a vivid and detailed memory of something that, in reality, never happened. People saw that Santa's red matched the Coca-Cola logo red perfectly, and their brains connected the false dots, assuming, aha, they painted him red for the brand. But, as we saw in Part 1 with Thomas Nast and the Bishop's Robes, red was already the character's favorite color. Sundblom didn't choose red, he simply notarized it. He made it official. What Sundblom did do was fix the exact shade of red and eliminate any variation. Before, you could see dark red, wine red, maroon. With Coca-Cola, it became that bright, saturated red we know. And he didn't just standardize his clothes. Sundblom defined his personality. In his paintings, Santa doesn't just deliver toys. We see him raiding the fridge, playing with the family dog, who doesn't bark because he knows Santa is good, testing toys before leaving them, or getting caught in the act by a child. Sundblom taught us that Santa was mischievous, human, and accessible. That visual narrative was so strong, it became the accepted truth. They even invented a sidekick many of you have forgotten. In the 40s, Coca-Cola introduced a character named Sprite Boy, a white-haired elf kid who accompanied Santa. Interestingly, the name Sprite didn't come from the lemon-lime drink, which wouldn't exist until the 60s, but from sprite, meaning elf. This character served to tell the story that Santa and Coca-Cola were inseparable, reinforcing the myth that the brand and the legend were one and the same. So, we arrive at the final verdict. Did Coca-Cola invent Santa Claus? The technical answer is no. The character had existed for 1,600 years. St. Nicholas provided the moral foundation and the gifts. Sinterklaas provided the horse, which later became reindeer, the cape, and the color red. Washington Irving and Clement Clark Moore provided the magic, the sleigh, and the chimney. Thomas Nast provided the North Pole, the workshop, and the basic visual look. But is it all a lie? Not really. Coca-Cola is guilty of Christmas cultural appropriation with malice and success. They didn't give birth to the baby, but they adopted him, dressed him in designer clothes, paid for his college, and turned him into the CEO of Christmas. Before 1931, Santa Claus was a fuzzy folklore figure. After 1931, Santa Claus is a registered trademark in our minds. Haddon Sundblom created the definitive version. The version you imagine when you close your eyes is Sundblom's. It is so powerful that even in countries without Christian tradition, the fat man in red is instantly recognized. Coca-Cola achieved what no religious or political empire had managed, unifying the image of Christmas across the entire planet under a single design. So the next time someone tells you that Coca-Cola invented Santa, you can tell them, no, Coca-Cola didn't invent him. They just gave him the best image contract in history. And maybe, just maybe, that has its own kind of modern magic. After all, it doesn't matter if he comes from a Turkish bishop or a Chicago painter. What matters is that year after year, the story still works. And that, my friends, is something no marketing campaign can buy.